Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today for Agile Team Models for Many Small Projects. If you could do me a favor and write where you're from in the chat, that will help me make sure I've turned on the webinar and that you can all hear me. Yes, we've got some. So we've got Fort Lauderdale. Hi, Cindy. Sterling, Virginia. Bethesda, Maryland. Houston. Hi, Michael. Hi, Eric from Houston. Grand Rapids, Michigan. Tyson. Okay, looks like we're off to a good start. Welcome, Tara, Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Dallas. Cool, good crowd. Roland, you're going to have nationwide audience here. We'll see if anyone comes in from Europe.
Okay.
All right, so once again, you're here for Agile Team Models for Many Small Projects. I'm Audrey, and I'll be monitoring your questions on the sidebar. You will receive an email with a link to the recording and information on claiming your PDUs and SEUs after we finish. And our presenter, Roland Cuellar, has focused exclusively on Agile software development and lean business process improvement for nearly 15 years. He's worked with Capital One, CNBC, Westinghouse Nuclear Power, Nationwide Insurance, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration, the U.S. courts, and many, many other clients on enterprise Agile adoption. All right, Roland, you are up.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. First of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, very good. Well, let's go ahead and move into the agenda here. You know, a lot has been written about how to scale Agile up to large programs. You see things like SAFe and Scrum at Scale and Less and all that kind of stuff out there. And these are models that have been designed to bring Agile techniques to big projects, often involving dozens of teams and hundreds of people. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. But many of the organizations that we talk to have the opposite problem. Lots of little projects going on at the same time. And a lot of times these little projects are just really a few people for a short amount of time. And traditional Agile methods are mostly designed around the idea of having a single stable team that's working on one project or one product at a time. And in this ideal situation, that team stays together for a significant period of time. But this just isn't really the reality that exists in some of the organizations that we often see, where they sometimes have dozens or even hundreds of small projects all going on. And staffing and team strategies for these environments can be a real challenge, I think. So in this talk, I really wanted to discuss various staffing models that we've seen out there at our client sites for dealing with these situations and some of the pros and cons of each. They have their ups and downs, all of them do. And so we'll get into some of those models. So a little bit about me before we move on. Just a quick bio, right quick. I'm with Lightspeed. Obviously, I've been doing the Agile thing for about 15 years now. I've worked for IBM and DHL and Lockheed Martin and NTT Data and some other companies along the way over the years. I've got a bachelor's degree in computer science and an MBA, and I'm a certified Scrum practitioner and a SAFe SPC and also Scrum at Scale practitioner. I will be here in a few days anyway. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Let's go ahead and move on and talk about really sort of canonical Agile, I guess, you know, kind of by the book, if you will. So let's go ahead and look at that a little bit. We're usually talking about 5 to 9 team members, you know, dedicated to a single effort, long-term stability on the team. They're cross-functional. They have most of the skills right there in the team that they need to deliver their product. They have a single product owner that prioritizes the work for them, and oftentimes there's a Scrum Master to focus on people and processes and communications and whatnot. And then this is sort of, you know, Agile by the book as we've all learned it. Oh, not quite yet. There are some implications and assumptions around this. You know, first of all, that there's a long period of work involved that would justify keeping this team together for months or even years sometimes. There needs to be significant budget to support this kind of a team. We'll talk a little bit about the money in just a moment. But the cost of a team like this can be extraordinary. I don't know if you've ever worked out the numbers, but we'll kind of go through that in a bit. And there needs to be a sort of a stable flow of work here. And that stable flow of work often needs to be related to a similar product area or technology stack or a particular business area or function that this team focuses on. et cetera, et cetera. And so in many cases, I mean, these conditions are fine and true, and this model works just great under those conditions. And the power of this team is that they learn, who can do what, and they learn each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses, and they can help each other out. And we have many minds working together, dedicated to solving a problem. And they just learn how to work with each other in order to just get stuff done. And that's a key and central part of Agile, really. But now let's talk about some of the financials related to this. Agile teams are really expensive, and I don't know if you've ever worked out the numbers, but here in the DC area where I'm at, the cost for an average cost for a team member might be $200 an hour, let's say. That doesn't mean people are making $200 an hour, but I've got different ranges of salaries on the teams: architects and tech leads and test leads and project managers and scrum masters, and then I've got other folks as well, the developers and testers. And so there's a range of salaries there. And like I said, this isn't the salary, but the cost. So after we add in vacation time and holidays and equipment and real estate and benefits and health insurance and all that kind of stuff, it's pretty expensive by the hour for a professional person of any kind. And if I have 2-week sprints, let's say, that's 80 hours. And if I've got, let's say, 9 people on this team, and let's say that if there's 2-week sprints, then there's 26 sprints in the year. So down at the bottom, $200 an hour times 80 hours per sprint times 9 people on the team comes up to be about $140,000 every 2 weeks. And that works out to be about almost $4 million a year. So that's wacky, crazy expensive. And that's just for one single team. So the finances around this oftentimes drive some of the teaming decisions and the structures that are made. And sometimes those lead to suboptimal outcomes. The finances start to drive the engineering, and we get some predictable outcomes, which we'll talk about more in a bit. But this money thing is kind of key to all this because it can drive some weird behavior sometimes. Okay, if we move on, this model can work great if there is a long duration of work that justifies keeping the team together. There's significant budget there to support that team, and we're talking millions of dollars now, even for that one team. The work is a relatively constant mix of technologies and business focus. They can work on a single large project or several medium projects in succession, or I have a long-term product team, and this product is going to be around for a while. So that model is sort of the by the book. But if we go ahead and move on.
So Roland, we have a poll here. You want to go ahead and
yes.
look at that one?
What's that now? Oh, yes, let's go ahead. We have a polling question. Let's go ahead. Audrey, you want to go ahead?
All right, we're up. So it's, what are your biggest issues with managing, you can see it, but many small simultaneous agile projects. So we have engineering quality, process consistency, finances and budgets, or all of the above, or no big problems. It's working for us. Okay, answers are rolling in. We'll give it a few more seconds. And last answers. Here are our results.
All right. Very good. So this is very interesting, and it's not unexpected. Some quality issues out there. Process consistency is the big one, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. It's one of the key points I want to make, that there are models out there in use that would sort of lead to process consistency issues. Finances and budgeting, and just the tracking of the money. And some people would just struggle with all of the above. A fair number of people struggle with all of the above, and sometimes these struggles are a function of the models that we're using. And we've got a handful of people out there who have figured it out, and it's working pretty well for them. And congratulations to you. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. We can all learn from you. Let's talk about scaling in general, and we go ahead and go to the next slide. That was sort of basic Scrum, and a lot of focus in the community in the last few years has been on how do I scale that basic model up to really large projects and programs and products, right? And in those cases, we have many agile teams all working towards single program goals, all integrating and testing their code together, et cetera. And these programs can take years, and you can see if a single team costs $3 million for a year, you could easily spend $1 billion without even trying very hard on a good size program. These efforts can take years sometimes, and there's a lot of them out there, stuff in the DoD, with just a lot of agile. The big FBI Sentinel program from a few years back, the Ellis program at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and in all of our commercial clients, there's always big re-architecture programs going on or next-gen programs going on, et cetera. And these are often, big, enormous, huge big kinds of things. Okay, and moving on, methodologies have been popping up to support these big efforts. You've got, SAFe, of course, and Scrum at Scale. These models are ways to integrate many agile teams and have techniques and tools in place to coordinate the work of those many teams. But this is only one kind of scaling, and unfortunately, this is the kind of scaling that gets most of the attention out there. And there is some confusion about this. I'm a SAFe trainer, and sometimes I get people or organizations in my SAFe classes that don't really have this large program problem. They're not trying to solve the problem of how do I get 20 teams all working together on the same thing. But they show up for the SAFe class anyway. And when I talk to them and ask them, kind of why they're in the class or what it is they were hoping to learn, I found out that they're really looking for is how to scale up to lots of little projects, not how to scale up to one big project. And there really isn't a lot out there on this topic, right? So we have these two different kinds of scaling that we need to think about. One kind of scaling, the big program type, is being heavily addressed at the moment. But the other one, the lots of little projects, not being really addressed that much. So Audrey, we'll go ahead and move on. What if, we can go ahead and go to the next one too. But what if I have a different kind of problem? What if I have, lots of small, short-lived projects? Perhaps they're just, 2 or 3 months of work each. And suppose that I have these really small budgets, a couple $100,000 maybe. And I've got lots of different technology stacks and business areas that I need to support. And there's really just a handful of people, not even a handful, it's really just 2 or 3 people's worth of work for each of these. Maybe it's half of a BA and half of a tester and 2 developers or something crazy like that. This isn't really what any of that, it's not really what the canonical Agile, old-fashioned Agile Scrum model is designed to fix. And it's certainly not what the SAFe or Scrum at Scale models are designed to fix. And so we're kind of lacking in good models out there on how to deal with this. So just to summarize where we're at on the next slide, in a sort of canonical Scrum, if you will, or Agile, that's built around long-term team stability, a stable flow of work, a budget to support that long-term team stability. They're focused on a single effort for the most part, and I've got all the skills that I need on the team. But our situation is I've got a lot of short-term efforts, a lot of starts and stops, lots of varied technologies, lots of varied business areas we're trying to support, lots of little budgets. And in each of these little budgets can only support, 2 or 3 people. And that's just kind of, yuck. These things do not match up. And so what we see, and we saw this in the poll, people are really struggling with this. There isn't really, well, we want the approaches of Agile and all the good things that Agile brings, but the model just doesn't quite fit. So we've helped design some models, and we've seen models out there in the wild. And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the models that we're seeing out there on how to deal with this, and what are some of the pros and cons of each, and where you might use them and where not, and what are some of the pitfalls. All right. So when I say nothing here, what I mean is that there's really very little written about this out there. There is some, and I'll try to point out some various sources of information so you can go do some homework and find what other people have written or said or they're experienced about how to deal with this. But what we don't have are the big solutions to this problem. There isn't sort of the safe equivalent on how to deal with this problem, or the Scrum at Scale equivalent on how to deal with this problem. And these are all things that we're trying to find out and figure out on our own. And so we'll just show you what we're kind of seeing out there. All right. So different ways to think about dealing with this, and some approaches that we've seen. Let's start with the idea of micro teams. The micro team idea is that I have these really small teams. Maybe it's a developer, two, and half a tester, half a BA, or one of each. And these are really tiny little teams. And you form these little teams depending on the need at hand. First of all, you look at the project that's coming up or the work that's coming up and figure out what skills are needed, what technology stack is involved, what business area is needed. And then you look at who's available, and you try to make a good match there. And you look at the budget, of course, and see how much time and effort can be afforded. And you can sort of custom design each of these little teams depending on the work at hand. And you might have lots of these little micro teams going on, all doing lots of little small projects and efforts. And we've seen this model in several organizations. It can work, but there are some pros and cons to this model, which I want to talk about on the next slide. Some of the pros are the financials are really easy. I've got 2.5 people. They're going to work on this particular effort for 3 months or whatever it is, 2 months, and so I can work out the financial numbers on that pretty easily. And I think that's what tends to drive a lot of the decision making. Unfortunately, that's not probably how we should make the best engineering decisions. But like I said, these teams are software development is crazy expensive, and so the finances sometimes drive some of the decision making. So the financials are easy. I can get very flexible dynamic allocation as needed. I can try to get the right people for the right job at the right time, depending on the needs and who's available on the bench at that moment, et cetera, et cetera. And so I can kind of custom form these little teams as needed. And there's some advantages to that as well. But there are some downsides to this. First of all, everybody on the team has to be really good, like crazy strong. If I've only got 2.5 people to support a project of some kind, then those 2.5 people have to think about everything, right? I still, even though it's a small project, I mean, I imagine it's an important business and something that needs to be done, or we wouldn't be doing it. You know what? I still need great engineering. I need great coding. I need great testing. I need great deployment. I need great planning. I need great communications. And it's really hard for 1.5 or 2.5 people to be great at all of that stuff. We're asking a lot of these people. And it's just hard to be good at everything. And it's easy for little things to fall through the cracks, right? That's the first thing there. Everyone has to be crazy strong, I think, for this to work well. The second thing is that you're always kind of storming and forming and norming, and it's hard to ever get to high-performing teams. You're working with these other people for a couple of months, and then another project comes up, and you're working with another little group of people. And two months after that, you're working with another little group of people, and you just never get into a good, strong pattern of how you communicate, how you work together, strengths and weaknesses. Everyone's just sort of fulfilling the needs of their role, but we never really gel as a team. And Agile's all about great teamwork. You don't get great results from mediocre teamwork, and it's hard to get to great teamwork when you're always working with different people. Okay? This tends to result in a lot of process variation, right? Every time you get a different group of little people working together, you get a different process. Right? I've got 2 or 3 people that are working together on this project, on this particular small project, and they do things in certain ways, right? And they figure it out. But then you go work with another group of people, and they have different ways of doing the design, or different ways of doing the estimation, or different ways of doing the planning, or even different understandings of Agile and the process, et cetera. And you just get I see a lot of process variation estimation variation when I have these micro teams. No group of people does it the same way, and you're always changing the groups of people. So you never get to a consistent process delivery this way. And this has some ramifications, good and bad. In some sense, we want people to innovate and come up with processes that work for themselves and work for that team of people. That sounds great. However, I've talked with developers who are very frustrated, and testers who are very frustrated, who, depending on the team that they're with or the project manager who's running this little project, they're expected to perform different things in different ways every time they do a project, and they're frustrated. The people on the team get frustrated because it's just never the same way twice in a row for them. And then even worse probably is on the customer side. Every time the customer comes to your department for some kind of project, they get a different customer experience. The process is different. What they're asked to do is different. The estimates and the way the estimates are done and it is all different. And it can be frustrating for the customers as well. So my experience with the little dynamic micro teams is quality issues due to just insufficient engineering resources. 2 or 3 people can't be great at everything, and lots of process consistency issues. Doesn't mean that it can't be done. It can be done, but under certain circumstances, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. So as I was saying, there are ways to deal with this, and I'm not saying that this model can't work. It can work, and I've seen it work. But under the right conditions. I think it can work well if Agile's been in place for quite a while and everyone has a fairly strong and standard way of understanding what we mean by Agile and or Scrum in our organization. And if the group or the organization has been together for a while and they know the business pretty well, they know the technology pretty well, I think this is a model that where you can end up at if you've got a pretty strong organization, but I'm not sure it's the right model to start with. If you've got a lot of new people on your team, or you have a lot of new contractors coming in all the time, let's say, and the whole Agile thing is relatively new to your organization, I think it's hard to work this way. You never get that good process consistency, and the engineering is, as I said, it's a real challenge. So I think you can end up in this model. I'm not sure it's the greatest place to start. There are things that you can do to deal with it. You can have shared architects and shared tech leads that try to ride herd over all these little projects and teams, but they get stretched pretty thin, I think. It's difficult for them to juggle all of these little small teams, and it just kind of, it can be a little bit crazy. You could have some standing or stable micro teams. Like I might have 2 or 3 people that stay together all the time. But if I've got a whole bunch of these, then I'm probably still going to have, if I've got 10 of these little micro teams, I'm probably going to end up with 10 different processes because they're all going to do things their own way. And I'm also kind of losing that dynamic allocation flexibility. I mean, one of the reasons for going to this model was that I could kind of pick and choose the people depending on the work. And so I would kind of lose some of that if I have sort of stable teams. And so, like I said, my take on it is this model is where you might end up after a while and you've got some good maturity. I might not necessarily start with this model. This model is easy on the financial side, and I think that's why it gets chosen a lot, but that puts the finances ahead of good engineering. And sometimes we get those quality issues and process issues as a result. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So that's one model, the micro team model. Another model out there, and by the way, all the models have their pros and cons. There isn't going to be one that has no issues with it. It's all messy. It's a messy situation. All right, so the next one is sort of the modified canonical agile model. And by that, I mean, well, if one of the core tenets of Agile is this strong, stable, cohesive team that has all the skills that it needs, so that's sort of the foundational element of the whole Agile approach. Let's not deviate from that. Suppose I take my standard Agile team of 5 to 9 team members. I've got most of the skills necessary. They stay together for the long term. There's maybe a Scrum Master to help with the process, but I modify that in certain ways. Maybe they swarm on small projects and get them done very quickly. This is an expensive team to maintain, But if I've got 9 people working on a small project, they can hopefully get it done pretty quickly, and so that project isn't bearing the budget for very long. And that's how you can make the finances work. Or maybe they work on several projects at a time, and so the cost of this team is being spread across multiple projects, and that's how we deal with that budget issue. And there's some other crazy things here, like if we're going to work in this way, then I may have multiple product owners I have to juggle, or I may have multiple and I may have multiple product backlogs and I have to juggle. So there's some issues with this model as well, right? But what I do like about this is that I've got multiple testers, I've got leads, I've got BAs, I've got UI people, I've got all that stuff, right? And I have all of the skills that I need. I have multiple minds working on the project, on the effort, and so I'm not relying on 2.5 people to try to remember everything. I've got 9 heads. Between them, hopefully have a better chance of remembering all the little things that need to get done in order to have great engineering happen. And they stay together, and they're dedicated to each other's success, and they learn each other's strengths and weaknesses and all of that. So there are some benefits to working this way. So let's go ahead and move to the next one. We do have to deal with the budget issues, though. I may have this one team that has 2 or 3 projects that they're working on, and each of these projects has different budgets associated with it, right? And so I have to figure out, some method of allocating the money. I can have a cost per sprint, like I said before, hey, maybe a sprint costs $140,000, and this one particular project only has a certain amount of budget, so they can only afford a certain number of sprints from this team, right? That's how we allocate the cost. Or I can have a cost per point. If the team costs $140,000 every sprint, and they're getting 10 points done every sprint, and each point costs $14,000 or whatever it is, and I can allocate some of the expense back to the projects that way. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have these different product owners and these different backlogs, and I may have to pull some user stories from one project and other user stories from another project, and the team may work on those at the same time. Obviously, for that to work, they're going to have to be similar technology stacks, similar engineering tool sets, and some of those things. And and if you've got that case going on, then I might advocate a little bit more for this model, especially if you're just getting started with Agile. I'll get better process consistency, I think, and some better engineering results, but the finances can get a little bit more messy. There are some resources out there that are available on this topic. If you look at some of the work by David Marquis, who this graphic comes from, he has some articles out there on in more detail on how to do this. Also, the Kanban community, David Anderson and some of those people have some articles and resources on how to mix these things as well. To me, it's not so much how to mix the work or manage the work as it is how you're going to allocate the budgets and the finances, I think, is probably the tricky part of this particular model. We can go ahead and go on to some of the pros and cons here. The pros are I get some more engineering skills on the team. I've got many minds. I probably usually get better quality from that. I get process consistency because I've got maybe 2 or 3 projects going on at the same time. But since the same people are doing it, the same process is being used across these 2 or 3 different projects. So I get that process consistency. And that team stability gives me the possibility of higher performing teams. The cons are juggling multiple product owners and multiple backlogs and figuring out how you're going to slice and dice the money. But in my opinion, I think the improved engineering quality and the improved process consistency outweighs the messiness of the financials. But like I said, your mileage may vary on that. Some organizations seem to be able to pull this off. Others just can't kind of get their minds wrapped around the idea that one team might be working on 2 or 3 projects at once, and we have to split their time accordingly. So let's go ahead and move on. I think around this point, Audrey, we might have the second polling question whenever you're ready for it.
All right, hitting the poll. Which method are you using to manage many small simultaneous projects? So that is popping up. So you are selecting micro teams or larger teams working on multiple project efforts simultaneously or other. All right, closing it down. And here are our results.
All right, very good. Got a little bit of a mix here. Most folks are trying to stick with the larger teams, and I do like that method a little bit better. Um, it does get messy, juggling the different product owners and the different priorities and trying to do two different projects for two different people at once, and that can result in some trade-offs being made both on the process side and on the engineering side sometimes. But I'd be interested in seeing what some of the other models are that are out there. Maybe if some of the folks who are doing other ideas have other ideas around this, send in a message to Audrey and let us know. Maybe if we've got a little bit of time at the end, we can talk about some of those as well. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So first thing is, are projects part of the problem? I want to really think about another way of thinking about this altogether. As we talk about all this, you start to get the feeling that the projects themselves are the problems to be solved, not so much the team structures or the engineering. To me, all the slicing and fine-grained slicing and dicing of the money results in tiny little budgets and tiny little projects and tiny little teams that don't often make real engineering sense. And the money is become dominant over good product development. And so we're starting to see some trends in some of our clients who are starting to question the projectization of everything. So here's the PMI definition of a project: is it's a temporary endeavor. It has a definite beginning and an end. There's a very defined scope, et cetera, et cetera. And that's not really, to me, what happens in most IT shops. Most of our IT assets, big software, applications and whatnot, or even smaller ones, they have very long life cycles. They can be around for 10 years or more. Oftentimes, what we really see is as soon as one project ends, we start up another one right after it to work on the very same set of IT assets, the very same software products, if you will. And so we're really just doing continuous spending at different levels over many years to support these things. There's really not a real definite start and stop to any of it. It's just sort of continuous spending over the years, and we try to chunk up the money somehow. But what I do see from a mentality standpoint is that projects tend to force big batches and long delivery times. Let's get all the requirements that we want for this project and batch them up and try to do them together. I oftentimes see that governance seems more important than customers, that managing the scope, et cetera, it becomes more important than solving customer needs, which are constantly changing. Sometimes the change management around projects just isn't flexible to manage the constant change that's happening out in the environment from our customers and competitors. And sometimes they're just treated as tactical one-time events, just hit the date and hit the budget. Versus products, if you have your product mindset on, your product hat on, products are very strategic. Projects are customer-centric. We are constantly making, changes depending on what's going on in the marketplace with our customer needs, what our competitors are doing. We're having to pivot all the time. And it's just it's a different mindset. And some of our biggest customers are really starting to make this change already, right? We've got several Fortune 500 companies that are coming out publicly saying that they're going to be moving from a project focus to a little bit more of a product focus. So this is already kind of happening. All right, let's go ahead and move on.
Roland, this slide is generating a couple of questions. So from Doug, doesn't good active project portfolio management address many of these concerns?
It could and it should, but unfortunately, it often doesn't. So I agree that projects done right can help and should help with all of the things that we're talking about. But what we're seeing though is when you start projectizing everything at too low a level, at too granular a level, with these tiny little budgets, trying to get down to really tiny little finely grained spending on finely grained assets around finely grained timeframes, you end up slicing and dicing all the people and all the efforts up so much that you just create a huge portfolio of little projects that all need to be coordinated with one another and all the dependencies therein. I just think it leads to a lot of problems that folks are starting to recognize and see. And so that's why we're seeing some people try to take a different approach. And so let me talk about this other approach that's going on that we're seeing out there, and let you just kind of see what that might look like. So another way of thinking about this, which is starting to gain some traction, is the idea of value streams and customer experiences as another way of thinking about how to deal with this problem. So what is a customer experience? A customer experience is the sum of the interactions between the company and the customer, okay? And it's comprised of all the customer's journey when they come to visit you through any number of channels and all of the touch points that happen along the way. And when a customer interfaces with you, they may hit multiple IT assets. They may interact with your call center. They may visit your website. They may use your mobile app. The company may send them snail mail of various kinds. And these are all interfaces to the customer. Let's say that you're, I don't know, you're just paying your bill, your phone bill, or your electricity bill, or your insurance bill, or something. You may interact on the phone and find out your balance. You may go to the website and make a payment. You could send a check through the mail. You may look at the mobile app. You're using all of these things to touch the company. The problem is that inside the company, they're probably treating each of these as a different cost center and a different team that manages all of these different interfaces and different projects for each of them, okay? There's probably a call center projects and web projects and mobile projects and snail mail projects. And they're all kind of dissociated with one another, but that's not how the customer views it. The customer uses all of them and uses all of them simultaneously. And so when we slice and dice the budgets and the projects according to IT assets and cost centers, we've sort of it's a completely internal view, and it cuts the customer out entirely, okay? So what some of our clients, bigger clients, are starting to do, and what we're starting to even recommend, is that you treat the customer experience really is the product, okay? That is actually what we are delivering. And so that becomes the thing we want to organize around. The second thing we want to think about from a team structure are value stream teams, okay? So a value stream is a set of all the services and functions that are required to go from concept to cash, right, from order to delivery. And it may encompass business people, user experience people, requirements people, architects, developers and testers and deployment folks and run support, all of those folks, right? You can imagine it as a little entrepreneurial company that can decide what it's going to build, design it, build it, and ship its own product with a little bit of autonomy. It's quite a bit bigger than a micro team and even bigger than your Agile Scrum team typically. So what we do is this is an even larger structure than your basic Agile team, and it stays together over a very long period of time because your customer experiences are very stable, right? You're going to be billing forever, right? You're going to be doing customer support forever. You're going to be doing claims management forever, whatever your business is, right? Those customer experiences are very long-lived, and if I have folks that stay together to support that, they become really deep in the customer experiences and deep in all the technologies that support it. So what happens is I put these two things together on the next slide, and I get this idea that I create customer experience teams that own a particular customer experience. And maybe the customer experience is searching or bill payment or claims management or whatever it is that your company provides, the various services your company provides. and they own that customer experience. And they may need to change several IT systems in order to implement a change in service. Let's say we want to improve, we want to improve customer experience in some way. And maybe what I'm going to have to do, I'm getting some echo, I think. I'll try again. Maybe if I'm going to improve a customer experience, one of my customer experiences, I may have to change several IT systems. I might need to make a change on the mobile app. I may need to make a change on the website, and I may need to make a change to what the people at the call center say and do when I call them. And all of these things work together to improve the customer experience in some kind of way. And instead of setting up 4 or 5 different projects to do all of that, I have one, right? And I have this team who owns this customer experience focusing on that. What I've got is end-to-end value stream team that becomes expert in the service. And by doing this, I've eliminated lots of little projects. All the same work is getting done, but I haven't sliced and diced up the money according to internal IT assets and internal departments and internal cost centers. What I'm doing in this model is consolidating the money and consolidating the people and giving them broader and bigger goals and outcomes to achieve. I get less project management overhead. I get real engineering teams, and they are very customer focused. I can still have good management around this. I can still manage budgets. I can still manage scope. I can still manage deliveries. I can still manage schedules and dates, and I can manage governance and compliance. But instead of doing it for 6 little projects, I'm doing it for one slightly larger one, and I'm pooling that money together. So that's the idea that I think that's starting to catch hold in some of the customers that we are dealing with. It gives them broad flexibility. We can go to the next slide, Audrey. So how does this idea help? By doing this, I get rid of all the little budgets that stifle good engineering, and I consolidate that spending to larger, stable teams that own a particular customer experience. And many of those formerly little projects can now be lumped up as continuous improvement under that customer experience. Removing what I'll call false dependencies. One of my biggest Fortune 500 customers recently created a map of all of the false dependencies that were created through having too many little projects. And by a false dependency, I mean the following. If I had one project, or if I had one budget, and that budget allowed me to change multiple IT assets, it allowed me to change the mobile app if I wanted to, and it allowed me to change multiple websites if I wanted to, et cetera, then what I could do if I needed to make those changes is just make those changes to all of those IT assets, right? But if I treated each of those as a separate project, there's a mobile app or multiple mobile apps, and I set up projects for those. And there's multiple websites, and I set up individual projects for those. Now I've got to coordinate the schedules and dependencies across 4, 5, 6 different projects, just because that's how we've diced up the money, right? And so creating lots of little projects creates lots of little dependencies that all need to be managed. And so by consolidating the money, consolidating the projects to be bigger efforts, I remove those dependencies. That doesn't mean that those IT assets don't need to be changed. I still need to make all the same changes that I used to make. But what I don't have to do is coordinate the schedules of 10 different buckets of money and 10 different schedules of when and how that money is being spent. So that's where all the little projectization of everything creates dependencies that don't really exist. Right? And I get easier macro level financial goals and tracking. For example, some of our customers are saying, this year we're going to spend $5 million to improve our customer billing experience. I'm going to create a value stream team of 10 or 15 people to support that. I'm going to budget that for the whole year. And I'm going to have a product manager who owns the billing experience. And that product manager has the ability to change whatever IT assets that they need to change in order to improve the customer experience. And I can put metrics around what we mean by improving the customer experience. I just bring this up as an example of how to instead of going deeper and deeper into tiny little projects, how to elevate the game, elevate the goals, elevate the budgets, elevate the outcomes, so that I can get people working more together as opposed to slicing and dicing them so finely that they're all working on tiny little things independently of each other. Okay.
And Roland, a question on this slide we
Yeah.
have. How do you manage progress versus cost?
So in all of these models, and not all these models, in this particular model, I've got a burn rate. I've got this team, and this team costs me whatever it is. So we said it before, $140,000, $150,000 every sprint. Right. So it's a constant burn rate. So I know what I'm spending. That's pretty easy. What we're going to do is focus on the outcomes and the benefits. So we may say, for example, I want to reduce, the goal of this customer experience team is to reduce the call center volume by 5% or 10% this year, or to improve revenues through the mobile app this year. I actually had a real customer last year who did this. Their goal was to improve, they used this value stream concept and the customer experience concept, and what they wanted to do was to improve the mobile experience for their customers and try it. And one of the ways they wanted to do that was to drive up the ability and the flexibility to do payments on the mobile app. But the goal coming from the executives wasn't to implement a certain feature or functionality on the mobile app. It was to improve the customer experience on the mobile app. The person who owned the customer payment experience decided, well, I think based upon our data that if we implemented a payment option on the mobile app, we would improve the customer experience. Customers would like that. They could pay their bill with just using their thumb on their phone. That would drive our costs up. It'll reduce the late payments that we often get, and our customers will love it. And so that involved in changing the mobile app and making other changes as well. And this team was able to do that. And they were able to not have lots of little projects and go through all of that. But they've had a team already that focused on this particular customer experience. They had a value stream team to do it. They did the design work. They did the development work. They deployed it very quickly, like in a matter of just a couple of months, and started seeing immediate revenue coming in through the mobile app. And so what they're doing is starting to focus more on measuring the outcome, the business outcomes, against this constant burn rate that we have. So that's kind of how they're thinking about the budgets and the costing and the measurement. It's more of an ROI kind of way of measuring financial performance. Here's what this value stream team is costing me. Now, what am I getting in exchange for it?
All right, and a couple more questions rolled in, but we're nearly to the Q&A, so we'll keep pushing it.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on. That's really that's really about it. Those were the three models I wanted to talk about. Let's go ahead and take a couple of questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
All right. So from a while back, Stan had asked, wouldn't longer term ongoing efforts be programs then? Projects and programs are managed differently.
I guess so. To me, that's a bit of a matter of semantics. I could see a program as being a series of projects, or sometimes we put multiple projects together into a larger program, or sometimes the program is, if a project gets to be a certain size, we just rename it to a program. I'm not sure that it actually solves the problem of how do I organize the people in order to deliver this, though. I guess that's the thing I'm trying to deal with here. Most of our organizations are trying to deal with is, what are the appropriate structures by which I manage this kind of work? And whether you call it a project or a program, I'm not entirely sure that solves the problem of how do I organize to deliver it.
All right. And thanks for joining our webinar. If you want to stick some questions in the box down below, we'll take some more questions. But if you have to drop off, totally understand. Send some questions to Roland to info@lightspeed.com, and have a great day. We do have a few events coming up at Lightspeed if you're in the DC area. We have a free Agile in Government workshop on December 3rd. That's just a couple days away. And then keep an eye out for our Lean plus Agile DC conference and job fair, which is coming up in May. Thanks for joining us today, and Roland, we're sticking around for a couple more questions. Here's
Okay.
one. How do you make a consolidated budget or budgets when you are billing team resources to various clients? That's from Karen.
Ah, well, I've seen a couple of ways to do this. One is that people would have to track the time they spend on each user story. And so most of the Agile tools can do this, or if you're just using, I've also seen teams just do it on paper on the card. So, I spent 12 hours on this story today or yesterday and today, and, that kind of thing. So when you're trying to bill time, you're working on multiple projects and you have to bill it back. You just have to do good time cost accounting. And that means tracking how much time is spent on each user story by each team member. That can be done at the task level. It can be done at the user story level. Most of the Agile tools out there will allow you to do that. The real problem is getting people to actually do it, of course, because everyone hates using this, tools oftentimes, going and updating tools and updating timesheets and budgets and stuff is even more onerous. People just really dislike it and often not as accurate at it as we would like them to be. But I think that's more of a behavioral issue than anything. I don't know. We have a good solution to that other than, like I said, asking people to track the time they spend on various stories and tasks.
All right, great. And I think that's wrapping up our questions. If you do have another, oh, here's one. Is it correct to surmise that Agile doesn't really work value/benefit at micro, small project level, really need to go to bigger value stream level?
I don't know if I'd be that strong about it. I guess I would say if you were really, I think, advanced in your Agile, people know the process really well. They know the tech stack really well. The group has worked together for a while, and I've got a consistent process that is developed in my organization. I've got consistent use of engineering tools and all of that. Then I think the micro team thing can work. In fact, I've seen it work in that scenario. I think where it starts to break down is if we're kind of new to Agile, we don't have good Agile discipline. We've got a lot of people coming and going all the time. Cast of characters changes as I get new contractors in or subs in or whatever. Then I think it's difficult to get that model to work well, like right from the get-go. I guess that's probably how I would summarize it. It might be a place where you can end up, but it's probably not like the place where you would start. And like I said, that doesn't eliminate all of the false dependencies that I think the micro slicing and dicing of projects does. I do think the value stream, product-based value stream customer experience approach will produce greater flexibility and more speed and less overhead. But we have to change our measurement system accordingly in order to implement that.
All right, great. Thank you, Roland. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll wrap it up with that. If you have any more questions, send to info@lacey.com, and you will receive a link to the recording of this webinar in about 1 hour, along with information on claiming your PDUs and SEUs. All right, have a great day. Thanks again.